Okay, fantastic. So the discussion at hand today seems like a very light one at first, unless, of course, you've journeyed with me before. You'd know that there's going to be nothing light about what we're going to talk about, because I love to look into the shadow and unconscious aspects of things. And I never, ever do that from the perspective of being anti anything. I have never been anti anything. I kind of, although she was a very controversial figure, I remember there is a quote by Mother Teresa who said, "Don't invite me to your anti-war rally, invite me to your pro-peace rally." And that's the anti-energy is something that many of the mystics of our ages have explained to us, that you actually eventually become more like the monster that you're trying to fight than, so fighting something. So please understand that what we're doing, like for those of you that were present with the last very difficult conversation, where we took on the whole empath conversation, the idea would be that we as spiritual beings attach very powerfully to concepts, which is quite silly if you think about what really deep traditional teachings tell us about the things that the true primal mysticism of reality is intangible and not able to be labeled. But I want us to playfully consider that there are certain spiritual concepts that we gradually build between us as a society. And if we could playfully talk about, because I'm not invested in any concept, the ego having a possibility of realizing, if a person is becoming very spiritually aware, that the ego's ultimate hijacking essentially is to hijack your spirituality. And I call this the spiritual ego. And it is majority of the talks that I have been doing recently and will be doing for the next 3 months is around the spiritual ego. Now, why this is going to be a very powerful place to start is essentially we are talking tonight about, I'm calling bullshit on the law of attraction, which I know just makes some people so uncomfortable. I know in my own family, people that I highly revere, including myself, that have this as a big part of their understanding of reality. So I invite you to take a step into this with me, not to break it down, but to have a really critical look at the possibilities and the shadow and the possible toxicity of something that we have only recently decided works the way that it works. So we're going to have a very short look at where the idea comes from. And we're going to have a look at how the idea then changed. And I think that you need this overview for you to truly understand where I'm coming from with what I'm going to say about it. But what I hope for you, just like with the empath conversation, what I hope for you is at the end of this talk, if it has any value for you, you have not for a second have any idea what I believe. You have no idea what it is I'm telling you to believe, that you just feel far more expanded and in a state of deep inquiry regarding the subject at hand. That's my only goal. Like those that came and sat at the table of the empath conversation, I'm hoping that if they've decided to keep that label, that they have become far more powerful empaths. So why the law of attraction? Well, there's a couple of reasons, because it's been very personally involved in my life and in my understanding. But it is also that I eventually decided in my journey that the toxic, and I'm not saying it all is, but the toxic aspect of love and life culture exploded out of this one law, the law of attraction. So if that is going to be true, I know that I'm talking to, like I said, even siblings that are very attached to this. We're going to take a very gentle, but very, I think it's taboo. It's very taboo. The first thing I want you to realize is I'm not going to talk much about what the law of attraction is. This might be something that you've just discovered that has deeply excited you, or it might be something that has become the cornerstone of your understanding, because in all honesty, as I heard Mary Jane say earlier, she has manifested many things. So there is no doubt that we would be spending this amount of time on something if there wasn't a lot to it. So let's not be the people that throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I ask you to suspend what you think I'm saying, and let us just go through the process as we slowly put the cake back together we might discover on the other end that it's not quite as innocent as we thought, and it is worth a second glance. And my logic in that, as I said to you, is that people are building entire New Age understandings over this single principle. People embody this and live through this very principle, which we have no doubt, because millions of people worldwide feel that it has improved their lives, but there is a very dark side to how many lives have been destroyed and how much shame is carried and how little power is actually held. And I'm going to go in this concept, and I'm going to go as far as to say that as we explore this, we're going to discover that there are mystics and people of ancient times, right from, only as far as we know, it's way beyond that, but the times of the Egyptians, the Alexanders, into the Greeks, into great eras of wisdom, where people have dedicated every moment of their lives to understanding the forces that push and pull within the universe. And I want you to understand that even with their life dedication, they were all so silly that they didn't figure out how simple it actually was, that you just had to think positively. Either that's true or there's far more to the story. So I'm very simplistically going to say, what is the law of attraction? Well, the law of attraction is the idea that your thoughts and your feelings are interacting with external reality all the time, which I don't think is a difficult thing to understand or to believe at all. But it's gone so deep that the law of attraction now is that everything that you are a vibrational match to finds it. There's many other aspects. I don't want to go through the 8 aspects of the law of attraction. This class, I feel, would be more for someone that wants a critical look at a big part of their belief. I don't want to go at someone's belief if it's not even part of theirs. I think I've explained that, though. So we're not going to go into it too much, but the law of attraction is very much, if I could give it a modern, I love to work with archetypes. It's so that I can be heavily sarcastic and so that people know that I'm talking about a certain, the modern law of attraction is the idea that I can simply have whatever I want, that certain feelings are accepted and certain feelings aren't, and that I've just got to stay in a certain vibe and I'll have all the money, all the resources, all the connections. It's basically just the fact that I am the epicenter of the world. And if I'm doing something wrong, basically, I'm just not sure. There's some part of the law of attraction I've got wrong. That's where we're going to start. That's the baseline. I'm using an archetype. I know yours might not be quite as ostentatious as that, but if we're honest, that's really where the law of attraction has gone. It's for like, you can have whatever life you want. That's what we think now. So, I mean, I want to talk to you about where the idea originated from. So, the first sign of any conversation to do with the law of attraction was the Hermetic traditions, which goes back about 25 to 2600 years. So about, you call it 500 BC, but only started really being recorded about 300 BC. Now, the only reason I'm bringing this up is what the Hermetics were. I mean, there's so many aspects to it, but basically they were a kind of agnostic understanding. There were many sects of Gnostic, but the sect of Gnostic is the idea that the greatest reality is that there is a certain truth, a deep permeating divine truth to things. And only to a seeker that dedicated himself, where it first shows up, but it doesn't show up as the law of attraction. Now, how it shows up in the law of Hermetics is they essentially, after hundreds of years of conferring and this whole thing, they started to develop 7 laws that according to them were from what they can figure out. And it's such an incredible story from where they apparently got it from. And I don't want to go into that because I'm not promoting Hermeticism. But what's incredible is all that it is their first law is, and I wasn't planning on, but let me run through it with you quickly. All is mind. The mind is all, and all is mind. Mind is one, and all is mind. So basically saying, if you were to study it, because each one gets studied over a 1 month to a 2-year period, the idea there is that your brain, or the synapses of your brain and everything going on in your head, including the vertebra of your spine, everything is actually a constellation. It is actually a microcosmic representation of the macrocosm of the universe. So in other words, your brain is literally a mini map of everything in existence. And that's the first thing that they learn. So it's quite easy to understand how most mystical schools came from that, how people began to understand that your thoughts and, and then if you were to jump probably about 200, now I'm going a little bit historical for you, but if you were to jump about 200 years later and you were to go into what gave birth from the Taoists right into the different forms of like Mahayana Buddhism, you discover there a very similar thing, that they do feel that the mind is interacting, is unlocking levels of perception, but they never said anything about physical aspects. They never spoke. If you look at Hermetics, okay, and I'll tell you why this is so important. The Hermetics guys, I mean, like the most famous one I always talk about was Paracelsus. These guys essentially were alchemists, and the hunt of the original alchemists, these are the original bad boys of spirituality, These guys had this absolute innate belief that if you stay deeply connected to God, that he would show you aspects of reality. So science and divinity were directly linked. And this was not just with them. This is in the mystery schools of Egypt. This is in the Hindu cultures all around. Those that built the greatest temples and those that broke into the greatest sciences, they were held by the divine in our history, it becomes important. And a big conversation is when they start to speak about the way the mind interacts with the universe, is the simple fact that there becomes this really big question: whose will? My will? The universe's will? Is there divine will within me? The Gnostics, the Rosicrucians, all these incredible schools of thought that have dominated humanity and enlightened many people are at their core this argument about whose will? Your thoughts, what your thoughts want, or in a deeper state, what your soul wants, or in a deeper state, what your spirit wants. I mean, if we go from Christianity right across the board to all the original religions, they all speak of this trifactor. They don't all agree that it's three, but that there's the body you, the biological vessel that is basically in this process of, call it evolution. And then there's the soul aspect of you, the aspect of you that stores every thought and every feeling and emotions and interacts with the world. And then there's the spirit aspect of you that's even further behind that is the actual God spark within you. Now, why this becomes an important conversation is you begin to laugh if you realize, first of all, if we do believe that it's just a case of sitting and hoping for certain things, and that will work out if you know how to charge it. And well, then you have to ask yourself, like, which part of God shows up if we were to use their kind of analogies? Is it the part of your frontal lobe that is obsessed with our separateness and is obsessed with war and obsessed with those things, that wants another car, that wants another partner? And really, one of the big toxicities of the modern idea of law of attraction is that thing that's bouncing around in your brain that you call thoughts, that we are so identified with, including myself, no doubt, that's the part of you that should be creating your reality by getting this absolute foolproof law that no one understood for thousands of years, even though they dedicated every second of their lives. And just suddenly in the last 25 years, we've got this sussed out, and now it's that simple. So there's a deep suspicion right here at the beginning. So that was in Hermeticism. They did speak in a lot of the mystery schools about this interaction between mind and reality, but there was none of this like what you want. The conversation was always around, how do you know when it is your will versus when it is the divine will? How do you know when you are wanting and aching out of aspects of egoic manufacture or out of some form of predatory mind? And this was the core. And they couldn't answer it for you because they felt that it was a lifetime of, I would almost go, what would the right word be, of commitment to your own inner journey to decide which aspects of you were dominating and speaking. So one could almost go that if the law of attraction is true, the way that we like to think it is, that maybe the whole world would be in a certain state of disarray, which is interesting because some people would argue that it is. So when the law of attraction again shows up, so it's in many mystery schools, the Christian Gnostics around from 100 to 300 BC, they had their own version of it. But once again, their version was simply that as you bring out the divine within you, the spark within you, you begin to almost be able to manifest reality differently. But once again, absolutely nothing in all of our history to do with success or to do with creating physical objects or to becoming a king. None of this was ever spoken about. In actual fact, the only story that in all my research that I could find, and I only knew it from memory, I mean, it didn't even come up in the hundreds of searches I did, was the great King Solomon in the older parts of the Bible. And what happened is, I'll keep the story very, very short, but King Solomon essentially was asked by God that he could have one thing, anything, and he could have it. And Solomon eventually says to the proverbial Lord in the Bible that what he wants is wisdom, because he told God basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but he basically told God that he understands that if his soul has wisdom in its journey, that he can create and develop in eventuality anything that he's actually meant to, anything of true value. And the question there, same as the Gnostics, same as the Hermetics, is before you create, you need to first truly know what is of value. If you were to jump that into an Eastern system, similarly enough, they also had 7 laws, but theirs are expressed through chakras. Then you realize they're saying a very similar thing, that only when those chakras are aligned do you actually begin to fully interface with your external reality. So do you see, like, there's two very, very similar things being said here, but the one is basically talking about your inner power. It's talking about the alchemy of your own emotions and feelings. The other one is literally talking about your brain doing something so that you have a Ferrari in your car, in your garage, like in a few weeks' time, regardless of whether this is what your soul is trying to do, regardless if your soul spark considers this an abomination to what it's actually doing on the planet, and completely contrary to the fact that there are many drivers within you. And you know that. I mean, we'll discuss that. So the next time it shows up, as far as I can tell, if we were to consider that wisdom of the ancients from Solomon himself, is in the early 1800s and then the late 1900s. It shows up in quite a few occults, like deep occult, which the word has been changed a lot nowadays. As Christianity started to make a certain methodical push in the early part of the century, the word occult was shifted mainly, but it meant to just be hidden knowledge. And what's interesting is there's 4 or 5 books that I don't feel are important to mention. Actually, I'll mention one, because the book blows my mind. To this day, I've read it 4 times and I get to the end and I don't know what I've just read. I'm still like not sure what the hell this woman is talking about, but it is so powerful that she's either the world's greatest bullshitter or this woman channels stuff that I can't even wrap my head around. I think her name was, no, I'm not going to Google. Oh, Helen Blavatsky. Helen Blavatsky. Wow. And she co-founded the Theosophical Society with the great Rudolf Steiner, as far as I know. So she does this book out of the blue, and it's talking about a cult, and there's a few other people. Now, the only reason I'm mentioning this is I'm trying to show you where this idea comes from. Because if you think that we don't have wisdom from the past, you're highly, highly confused. we are in our most unwise period right now, as far as I'm concerned, which balances right in with this awakening. So what happens is the reason that it came up in the occult teachings was essentially because, and I might be wrong about one or two of the stuff, but I mean, I've been studying this for years. I'm pretty positive. What happens is they are trying to connect to the great Hermetic laws, and also some like the Thoth tablets and all these really interesting pieces of work that no one's exactly sure when they land on, but are hundreds and thousands of years old, okay? So the idea here would be so interesting that they are essentially only speaking about the one mind. Then if you jump into this last century, now this is where you start to understand why I'm boring you with the history lesson, because everyone's going to shoot you down if you tell them that the law of attraction is not what it seems. So then what starts happening is, I'm going to jump, but there was a few books, and there was a huge thing happening in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, 60s, and it's been rising ever since. There was this whole idea of suddenly you weren't, as in the hundreds of years before, you weren't a specific thing like a shoemaker, generation after generation after generation, and it was a thing of honor, and it was now this idea of success, and everybody was scrambling for a certain amount of what existed. I mean, in honesty, I think in all of history, we have been out of balance of who has more and who has less. But within our consciousness came this idea with the last century that we have to accumulate. And of course, with the populations growing and with the devastations and things growing, it was enforced. And it's a fascinating thing. If I had to attribute a single book that probably had the greatest shift towards where the law of attraction comes from, it would begin, I can't remember what the book's called, but it was by Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. Does anyone remember that book? Just by showing me the hands, I'd just be interested to know. Okay, so a couple of you do. So I can tell you that if you were to like really spend a few years studying the law of attraction, you discover that this part where success and having whatever you want, and where that comes into the picture, was him and one or two other people, but he was one of the most major ones. And this book just completely revolutionized how people saw things. And after that, there were quite a lot of people. There was Bob Proctor, there was David Schwimmer, there were many people, okay? And what makes this whole story really interesting is that now we know very far down the line, and it's not a character assassination, and I don't mean to do it, but I just want to give you an example. Napoleon Hill, who was supposedly this mastermind, he wrote 2 or 3 books, probably the biggest all-time mind power books, whatever. And nowadays we know without a question, it's not even conspiracy. You can go and read it on any website, that the guy was up for like 14 charges of fraud. He dropped his name so many times. He took out a university. He literally he's considered one of the first persons to actually come up with a proper pyramid Ponzi scheme. Like, this guy was a wheeler and a dealer of note. And when a cult or deep hidden information, for those Christian individuals are going to send me hate letters for speaking with reverence about certain occult information. But basically, this hidden information, when this information started to permeate out into the world through great sages like Rudolf Steiner at the turn of the century, Manly P. Hall, 1910, 1915, what started happening then was that these very greedy, very simplistic individuals started to understand what the modern spiritual ego was. And the modern spiritual ego was this kind of thing where we don't want to do this deep work. We want a very simplified version of everything. And it's honest, if you think about today, I know that I was so attracted and so excited at this idea of, oh, you mean that's all there is to it? You just got to do this and this and this, and everything will be yours. Never mind the fact that I was mentally ill, and the idea itself almost completely fucked me up, to be honest with you, because I spent years of my life wondering what I was doing wrong and why I couldn't control my thoughts. And then, of course, blaming myself because I had created that in the first place. So it's a rabbit hole of note. But the fact that it had some toxicity for me and made me go and hunted down for a few years, I think there will be many others. So that's where things get now interesting. Then let's jump ahead now. Like, let's not do the whole history thing. Let's go to like The Secret, right? Because that's where shit. Napoleon Hill, he completely bastardized it already. But now The Secret was, because I love an archetype. And I think if I go and negatize or negate any particular teacher's work, it would be completely against who I am. But I could actually do this by teacher, okay? And why it is they jumped on the train and why that's an element of them losing their integrity. But let's take The Secret itself, because then I feel like I'm not really going at anyone in particular. So Rhonda Rhimes created, I think it was Rhonda Rhimes, The Secret. And the whole idea was, yeah, now, wow, opening of The Secret themselves, they use this idea of what essentially has happened is they use Napoleon Hill's opening of his book. And what his book opens to say is that a very famous rich man at the turn of the century, I can't remember his name, an Oppenheimer or something ridiculous like that, asked him to go and investigate and spend time with all the richest men in the world and find out what they all knew in common. I mean, who's not excited by that? Geez, I'm sitting forward. I want to watch it again, just telling you the story. Now, what's so interesting about The Secret and this idea is, first of all, Napoleon Hill has been proven to have never met the guy. Like, this is not even conspiracy. This like all came out 10 years ago already. Like, Napoleon Hill had never met that guy. That guy said to him, I don't know what you're talking about. Most of the people he supposedly interviewed said that they never even said hello to him. So he made the whole thing up. It's been proven. So The Secret already, even though that information was open, they're beginning with that, right? But let's go a bit deeper. During The Secret, there are about 12 to 16 people that share information and are very excited. And I want you to just plug into this modern version of spirituality and how exciting this is for people. They're sitting there and it's this whole idea. It's so simple. You know, the universe does what you want, blah, blah, blah. And this whole thing is going on. Now, I could do every single one of them, but let me put this to you. If this is of interest of you, because I want to move on, if this is of interest of you and you're not sure if I'm character assassinating here or if I'm trying to just rock you slightly awake in a subject that I'm going to reignite in you in a different way, I will not leave you feeling despondent, then I want to tell you that if you go and do your own research, I mean, guys, I'm not a computer, but like off the top of my head, Mike Shimmer, I think it's Mike Shimmer, he's the guy explains to you how to work with money and whatever. He was arrested like 3 times after that. His whole corporation has been, he's considered, like, there are entire websites where they're like, oh, he stole all our money. Mike Proctor started, he's got still to this day, he's got a multi-level marketing agency, which is very controversial. It's been banned in some countries. He has about 10 cases of fraud up against him. So why do I keep bringing that up? These guys are obsessed with what you can get from the universe in this physical value. And the lady that speaks about her way that she healed herself, died of cancer, of the cancer she was speaking of 3 years later. Jerry, what's his name? Abraham Hicks, Jerry Hicks died of cancer, even though a lot of his teachings were about, because I mean, let's be honest, they've influenced the world beautifully, I know. But Jerry Hicks, after, I mean, I could give you quotes like this long where he speaks about why you don't have to get sick and this whole thing. The guy died horrifically of cancer, and it was so controversial that they only admitted 3 years after he died that he was dead. And then they only admitted 2 years after that he was on heavy chemotherapy for like 18 months, because they kind of knew that if people, you know, you guys are just getting the picture here, okay? So it's not, notice how fast I jump across this, because I don't want you to go for one teacher. I want you to feel what's happened here. Deep spiritual information, absolute deep knowledge that has been drawn out of the divine over thousands of years has landed in the lap of a few very greedy people that are marketing geniuses, okay? And I'm not saying that they're greedy. You can decide for each person. But of the 16 or something people that were in The Secret, almost 12 of them If you were to just do a deep dive on any of them, you will be absolutely stunned. You'll be absolutely stunned. First, like most of the stuff they claimed, none of it happened. Like none of it happened. So where does that leave us? Wow, what a difficult conversation. I mean, sure, talking about this stuff. And I thought a lot, like whether I should use names and things. And honestly, to me, it's just a very vague curtain. It's just to make you realize that like the secret was toxic, man. But now what would be the powerful side of it? And what would be the positive side? Because trust me, guys, I'm not hating. I think there is so much to this. So we just pause there for a second. I mean, so let's ask the question then. So is it true? That's the $1 million question. Is it true? And I'm not going to give you that answer. I think that I'm speaking a lot into it. There are many parts to you. There is a soul who has a certain purpose. You know, if you think about, we mentioned him earlier, because I don't say what, I don't believe anything. I love all ideas. If you look at Rudolf Steiner, I mean, he wasn't the only mystic or master that spoke about this, right? I mean, Rudolf Steiner, I'm using him as an example because a lot of them were very far out there. Rudolf Steiner changed the schooling system of the world, right? Because he essentially created the Waldorf system. And Rudolf Steiner spoke constantly about how there's the biological you, which has an entire eternal process that will be forever evolving. And then there is the soul you, and then there is the God you, as in the spark, and how these interact. The Christians eventually try to explain it to the people by talking about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Like, if you actually look at what they're trying to explain to you, I'd go as far as to even say, like in shamanism, you are an intersecting point for more energies than you could possibly understand. You are like the house where all the intelligence of nature and the animal kingdom are expressed, because here you are, and all the intelligence of the universe and the gods and the archetypes and everything that exists is housed within you. You are, as thousands of poets have pointed out, where angel meets beast. I mean, what an honor to be a human being. But what does that have to do with this conversation? To be a human being is to unify mighty houses, which is why our art and our music and things that inspire us are the way we are. Because to be human is to suffer. To be human is to awaken and suffer more. To be human is to find profound joys, to find profound values, but then to suffer. I mean, this is not just me, right? I mean, let's jump. We talk about Buddhism. The core of Buddhism is that life is suffering. Now, you might, if you're very stuck in the love and light thing, you might go, well, that's terrible. Or there's a part of you that's going, shut up and listen, because you're suffering and you're kicking your own ass because you're upset with yourself because you're suffering. And once you get your head around that, it's quite powerful that this process of being uncomfortable is what causes us to shift. This process of feeling that you're not quite happy with what you're experiencing is what makes you ask really deep questions. And I ask you that this process has been going on for so many years, and many people in this room believe, perhaps even myself, that it's the same people that are manifesting and being reborn. So my question then is, what kind of deep exploration into divine intelligence do you think people will take if they suddenly start thinking, oh, well, you know, you've just got to think positive. Like, and if you don't, you do it wrong. And you guys are disgusting. You guys that are poor and you guys that are sick, like, you guys are got to get the secret, man. You got to get the stuff sorted out. So it's a really, really controversial part of reality is to consider that. So if we start looking at it in a more powerful way, though, there is, I think his name was Paracelsus that quoted this, but he said that the universe is under no prerogative to make sense to you. And these guys, these mystics, they all knew that, like, at a certain level, if you look at the 7 laws of Hermetics, there's certain laws there. Like, and do you know how you know if you have touched on a divine law? This is how I work it, right? Because I read through so much divine law, is if I know that it's true because I experience it. I want the law of attraction the way they're explaining it to be true. I know a part of it's true, but I don't experience it that way. So I always end up coming back to myself and shaming myself about the process. But if we, for instance, were to use one of the deep Hermetic principles, let me pick one, the pendulum swings, that all of life is an in-breath and an out-breath. C comes in, C goes out. Emotions feel amazing, emotions feel bad. You feel connected to God and one with everything. You feel isolated and human. And these pendulums are swinging within you and within the universe all the time. This is one of their laws. And if you understand the pendulums, you even know that sometimes it's not a good time to try and create something because your pendulum is stuck. That's on this side. You know that feeling when nothing's happening, and suddenly everything starts happening. And now these guys have got these 7 interlocking laws. So now tell me, when I read this law, I'm like, oh, hell yes, I experienced this. Man, a week ago, I thought I was enlightened. And then like 2 days ago, I couldn't get out of bed because I just wanted to eat pizza and cry myself to sleep or whatever it is, you know, like the world swings. I sit and meditate on the beach and I watch the sea come in and sea come out. And sometimes that sea is in absolute chaos. So it's just an incredible thing. So we're not going to go into the laws, but I want you to just consider that when you take something on, you should feel challenged. I mean, that challenges me, but it helps me. You know, the magicians of the Hermetic ages, they believed that you studied the laws deeply enough that you would never actually bend the laws, that you would ride them in a way that you would almost be able to harness the true will of the universe. I mean, I want you guys to consider that the reason why we started our religious pursuit, our spiritual pursuit, who knows how long ago? I think about 500,000 years ago. According to history now, they're saying about 50. The reason we started this pursuit, there's one specific reason, and very few philosophers have ever disagreed, is because nature and life are filled with certain absolutes, with immutable cycles, okay? Immutable. Example, the sun is rising and the sun is setting. It's always been like that, and we don't know, but like at the moment, it seems like it's always going to be. You are going to die. Fact. Fact. I don't know what you read, and I know that you maybe think that you're about to ascend. I know hundreds of people that were about to ascend. I've been to their funerals. You're going to die. Okay. So here's the whole thing. Why am I being so brutal? These immutable facts standing, just imagine a man standing in the grasslands thousands of years ago, and he's just lost his wife, and he has this limited understanding. They all knew that they were part of a great purpose pattern. All animals know it, and we were still part of that. I want you to just imagine like what kind of stories and thoughts and feelings you would try and engage with to get to actually come to terms with the things that are so difficult to come to terms with. So, point being, that this absolute incredible drive within man, this Gnostic divine beauty, has always existed within us. And we slowly, through our realizations and through our free will, and through whatever it is you want to call it, we're reaching really massive conclusions. But I want you to consider how things have changed, right? These guys were doing deep soul searches to try and become okay with death. Like most people in history, from Socrates to these guys, were trying to, poets, sculptors in Greek times, trying to capture the perfect essence of beauty and youth. They were talking about death. And if you consider why they'd be obsessed with that, because there are certain things you cannot change. There are certain things that just happen. And true spirituality, to me, is not me pretending that I might not be hit by a bus, is not me pretending that I might not get sick. True spirituality to me is to live and embody a set of teachings and values that give me the strength and the courage to face no matter what feeling, no matter what thought, what experience I need to have, okay? And why that would become interesting is if we look at modern times, how toxic could it be if you have someone that's sitting in his bedroom right now or somewhere in the world where they're doing a deep dive on trying to find some form of God wisdom, and there is absolutely no sign of surrendering the ego in this new idea. There's absolutely no sign in trying to understand that there's a deeper course of planning action here. There's literally just this idea that you must control your thoughts. And so I think we have to identify also how the love and light culture have exploded from this. Now we're speaking in archetypes. I mean, I say love and light all the time, but the archetype, would be, I want you to just anchor this for a second. The archetype, would be shaming of certain energies, of never noticing that the law of attraction cult, which is what I call it. It's the biggest cult in the world at the moment, as far as I'm concerned. They never speak about those that are really on the fringes, that are suffering really deeply, that are very poor. As far as they're concerned, there's like some vague way that this whole thing comes together, almost like someone that's new to physics trying to explain how the macrocosm and the microcosm meet somewhere in the middle. So my point being simply that there's a lot of spiritual bypassing that's taking place under the law of attraction. Somebody else is having a very difficult time and they're just trying to speak into their devastation, and they get answered by the supposed woke community like, oh, but you shouldn't do that. Are you thinking positively? I mean, this person could be dealing with hundreds of year-old wounds that is literally his entire soul family has lined up these battles and these experiences. And 2021, you've been the pinnacle of this experience. And you're sitting in your bedroom crying because you just don't understand why you can't be positive like your friend. And I think we've got to be so cautious. It means once we've taken this idea in our heads, so this is the shadow, because as I said, there's two sides, but this is the shadow of the law of attraction. The shadow is that you begin, once you've decided that it is black and white, law of attraction, that's how it works. You unconsciously start to judge everybody else who doesn't seem to be able to tap into the power of it. And that's where the problem comes in, is that people can't share their deep suffering with you without a part of you being like, oh, yeah, but wait, if I just tell them to change their way of thinking. And yeah, it's a very, very controversial subject, as I did say to you. But you must remember that I'm also not saying that we are not interacting with reality. So that would be the dangerous side of me, to me, of why we have to be cautious of, if we're going to take this as a straight rule, even though every ancient sect has told us that the divine can never really be encapsulated. It can only be experienced. It's only through devotion. I mean, there's a passage in an Arabic passage where something like the divine will only whisper its secrets to those that are most devoted, because on his pages, each which falls are most safe. This idea almost of like, if there really was a law that unlocked the universe, you wouldn't be able to watch it on a video. Trust me, you really wouldn't be able to. So to me, what this does is it makes me aware of the possibility of how this cult, which is in the middle of a true awakening, is almost parasitical in the way that it is coming across, right? The way it comes across. And if you think about this idea, how this would play out, because this is an archetype, right? I guarantee you, including myself, I use the law of attraction, but I'm so aware. I am so aware of the shadow aspect, and that it's not black and white, that I use it to become aware of my thinking. I use it to ask myself, what are you emanating into the universe? I use it in kind of its original form, but I'm really not shocked when my bank account didn't switch over, because the question here is, what is of true value? You can listen to someone like Manly P. Hall talk for an hour and a half if you try and ask him about manifestation. He'll talk for an hour and a half, or did, on what's value. Hour and a half, most people fall asleep. And if you really listen to him, he's trying to say, how can you decide what you want to manifest or create if you haven't figured out what's valuable yet? So it's an incredible conversation. So he has this archetype sitting in front of us, feels like it has to give advice, feels like people that are in that situation just haven't figured out the secret yet, even though you haven't either. I mean, because it's such a shocker that we never realize it's not working for us. I've literally never met a person that just unlocked us the way they said it did. And the other part is like it's gone into many spiritual communities where it's used as a weapon, like where people have to speak a certain way. Their shadow is not welcome. You can't be broken. You know, addiction and abuse and trauma, it's all a choice. And yeah, what a magnificent and difficult thing to even open up. So where does that leave us now? I mean, what does this leave us with? I have absolutely no doubt that we are in a very interesting time. I know that it's spoken about as an awakening. And I do believe that there is an awakening taking place. But I want to go as far as to say that if you look at certain, actually, to be honest, I think that even Buddha spoke about it. I was going to say certain speakers of antiquity, that it actually doesn't take that many people to tip a whole planet. It actually doesn't take that many enlightened people to really shift the society. So this idea of a mass awakening is where I start to get very controversial and where people start to get a little bit angry with me. And I do get quite a bit of angry mail. But I'd go as far as to put it this way. We have mistaken a flood of what we think is very logical information as an awakening. Most people are mistaking understanding something that finally makes sense to their logical brain. And the only reason most of it's making sense to their logical brain is because someone's watering it down so they can multi-level market it to you so that it can make perfect sense. And you're now losing the value of truly having to sit with God alone, quiet in the room and ask, is this true? What should I follow? What is of value? But yeah, essentially there's one of your biggest problems. And you have to ask yourself how the value does, like, what is the value of the whole thing? The shadow side is without a doubt there. But if there is a false awakening, let me speak into that archetype very briefly. The archetype of the false awakening would be that if I speak certain words, I know certain things, I dress a certain way, I say certain things, and I hang out in certain things, that I am awoken, which couldn't be further from the truth. It could not be further from the truth. And what we essentially have is we have this world delusion going on at the moment, which is a really, really powerful start, because the delusion is, I mean, how do you know something's a delusion? You only know because you're in a deep state of query. So there is definitely what you could call a stirring in humanity right now, because they're getting excited by new possibilities. But unfortunately, we are looking for the Big Mac, McDonald's version of spirituality, but in perfect time, just because of how perfect the manifestation of the prime creating energy in all things is that people gradually, and each one at a time, are going to look a little bit deeper beneath the surface of this very pretty yoga pants kind of crystal wielding society. And that is why, if you want to see if I'm all on my own on this thing, that is why you're starting to hear terms like shadow work. That is why people are starting to identify terms. First time in human history, we're using terms like spiritual bypassing. We have great writers talking about this stuff. And the reason is because if you want to do the real work, the universe has no prerogative to make sense to you. If you do not stay close to that divine feeling of the fact that you're part of something greater and that this part of you can only understand so much of it, then you begin to become highly afraid. And it's our absolute laziness. Most people for thousands of years have reported that if they just pray or meditate or spend a little bit of time with this universe that is almost impossible to understand each day, they know that they're just part of something perfect, and they'll be ready to accept whatever it is that they need to accept at the time. And I mean, this is not hidden knowledge. Most people will tell you, think about a time in your life where you spent a lot of time closing your eyes and knowing that this absolute manifesting presence was there, waiting for you to slowly unlock your own potential without any rush, without any judgment. What a magnificent thing. So yeah, that's where it leaves us. And I'm being controversial with this false awakening. It's an archetype. Like you could tell me, you could say to me one day at a talk or something, Nathan, but you said this is a false awakening. And I would reply, yes, I want people to be shaken up a little bit with what they think is an awakening. If you look at the stages of enlightenment, for instance, that Gautama Buddha spoke about, right? Awakening was only the first stage. And awakening was simply to become aware of the fact that there is something else going on, that there is a greater purpose pattern behind things. That was stage one. We have literally an entire spiritual globe of people stuck in stage one arguing about the Dharma. Now, if you into Buddhism, he would explain all these beautiful things, all these beautiful contexts and ideas and concepts, and Buddha would blow their mind until they started arguing about which one was true, Dharma being their version of truth. And then he would rock their worlds by saying, okay, the most important law, there is no Dharma, there is no laws, there is no truth, there is no nothing. And then these people would be so confused that only one or two would hear what Buddha was saying. The rest would go back to temples, take his information, package it, and start arguing amongst themselves whether there is a soul, whether there isn't a soul. And these are really powerful ramblings if you're just considering this huge subject. So in Buddhism, there is this idea that you begin to see. Now, what we are all doing is this is what we think an awakening is, including me. We now have information that is a little bit more exciting of how reality could be, but it holds very little accountability, And it mostly only appeals to those people who have landed in, no one wants to talk about this, landed in a demographic on the planet where they're okay. I can promise you that in the 80s, the guys in Rwanda would have told you to go stick your law of attraction up your backside. I promise you. This stuff only attracts, even a lot of the modern new age, which is all stolen. It's all been mended gradually from deep, deep teachings. So trust me, they're all true. We just have a very, very lazy, egotistical version of these laws. And that's a very powerful thing to consider, because someone that is absolutely anchored in the law of attraction, that is pretty much the most important thing. Never mind the stuff that we've been talking about, the way they deal with people, the way people feel shame, and that's the only reason I covered the fact that these people that claim it is so easy and you shouldn't get sick, and they did it, and they did the same thing and then covered it up. So it's not a character assassination. It's like, to me, I want us to rock into a state of divine sobriety. The Lord behind all things owes you no explanation. And if we can, in our absolute sovereign wisdom, learn certain things that make us stronger and guide us, like the fact that most guys have agreed that literally when you close your eyes, you have a map of the whole divine universe within you. So yeah, and I mean, where would that leave us? It leaves us in a difficult place with the conversation. It makes us realize that the spiritual ego can very much dance and play in this area. The alchemists are the ones that came up with this. And the alchemists are the ones that were so close to God, but they were not lunatics, because the alchemists are the original chemists. It is an undisputed fact that the alchemists of, for instance, Alexandria, which was Egypt, we don't have early Egypt history, unfortunately, We can surmise, we've got pictures, but we don't actually know. But the parts of Alexandria that we do know about, right? There is absolutely no doubt that these guys were not just connected to God, but connected to science as well. How do we know this? Because, for instance, Paracelsus, he is known as the grandfather of our chemistry. It is an undisputed fact that, that mathematics came from the Greek Hermetics. It is an undisputed fact that the original doctors in the Greek traditions, which started the whole oath and their traditions, were Hermetics. So in their quest for the divine, they found science. And now there seems to be this incredible split that's taken place. It's quite fascinating. And that's why science has left us where it has. It's left us as a point where if we don't get the message soon, things are going to get so upside down that in 20 years' time, we're going to have different sects of science actually fighting amongst themselves like religions without them realizing that they're actually a school of thought. It's the most bizarre thing. And that's just, yeah. So what would this mean for the average person? Because we are approaching our end here. We'd like to start to wrap it up and hear what people have to say. And what that would mean for me is that there is no doubt that learning to understand and face certain thoughts completely change the way that you interface with reality. There's no doubt about that. It is right in the core of Zen itself, where just in the observation, without analysis, that the true value of things will expose itself. And there is no doubt that in my own path of addiction and mental illness and emergence and falling back into my darkness, and that if I had not unfolded, some of you have listened to my talks on the human mind, how powerful positive thinking and becoming aware of feelings and is so important. And that to be willing, this is like, guys, let's repower this now. For someone that's into the law of attraction, do you know what it tells me about that person? That person's ready to take responsibility for their lives. That person is ready. I mean, how much guts does it take to actually go? To me, like the law of attraction is like the ego's brilliant trick, because it's like, hey, this is how simple it is, which gets you over there. But to actually listen to what they're saying takes incredible soul courage, because basically you're willing to accept that it's all your fault, which on some level, to be quite honest with you, I do believe. I just think we should be very cautious how we approach that, of which part of you is creating this. Because what most people I have ever coached is, they've got a part of their brain, which you could call thinking, or the ego, which is at war with another part of the brain. And this one's trying to create this. And it's got nothing to do with the real you. The real you with its absolute purpose, the reason why you were born the way you were born, the reason why you've got to uncover these great initiations and face certain things so that you can, if you choose to, anchor certain gifts in life later on. I mean, we've spoken about how in some Hindu, like astrology, you're only supposed to actually have it figured out by 61, what you're going to give people spiritually, like what your gift is. Around 61 to 66 is that period you're supposed to start unlocking it. And some of us, most of us never even do. So that's where it leaves us, is that I take responsibility. I notice every thought within me. I interrupt my ego all the time. I speak to myself, but where it doesn't lead me is I do not judge what I'm thinking. I sometimes am aware of the fact that there is more to what I'm thinking. It's often what I'm thinking is an interface of different aspects of me, also dealing with an outside world, which is many co-creators. And what's been really powerful for me is I have tried to law of the attraction, my emotional state sorted out for so long that I just gave up. And it's only when I gave up, I got somewhere. All emotions are welcome in my house. All emotions. There are still some things that I feel that just baffle my mind. I lie on my back some days. I don't know if it's because they say I'm epileptic. I don't know if it's because of my past lives. I don't know if it's because I did something bad. I don't know if it's because I'm anchoring the karma for the universe. Like, I really don't need a big story, man. But I do know that I lie in bed some days where I'm too tired to think. I'm not stressing about anything. I'm completely empty. I've maybe meditated for 2 hours to try and get through it. And I know that sometimes I'm in an emotional turmoil for days. Like, some days I cry and I don't even know why. I hear an animal sound. I'm walking on the beach and suddenly I'm sobbing for humanity. I know that other times I open myself up on a run and suddenly I cannot believe how once again the divine is showing me that behind the seeming chaos is always just behind the wall of where you can touch or write it down or record it is the absolute perfect pervading presence of all things. In other words, we have moments in our lives where we have these, what I call peak human experiences, where we get to just for a little while climb out of the proverbial jungle and go and stand upon the precipice of the mountain and look down on the experiences of your life and understand just for a moment how each one has interwoven. So to me, I don't want the mystery solved. To me, if I keep that expression of the divine love and understanding and that runs through things, to me, it's a devotion. Then I feel safe. And if I go through periods of my life where I become very disconnected from myself and I get very lost in, I guess it's called it very worldly things. I mean, because used to say what we should be involved in. I notice that if I get a chest pain or if I have a seizure or something, and all I've been doing, like especially, like I've been very, I don't know what the word is, unhealthy, just depends. I'm so much more scared because there's a part of me, like I feel like I'm more trapped in just that little part of my brain that's trying to make sense of why does this have to happen. And I find though that if I do the spiritual work and I spend time with myself and the ocean, and it just makes sense to me. It's like, it's not that confusing. There the fish dies, the ocean comes in, the ocean goes out. These immutable laws are surrounding us all the time. And it's why we originally started spirituality, was to try and get present with that being, that thing inside us that we knew was going to take us on this incredible journey of expansion and growth, and how it was that we were going to be able to create a system of understanding, a system of symbolism, to be able to help us when we were in the proverbial jungles to find those plateaus, which beyond this life or the next, plateaus there are, and moments where, like in many schools of thought, like theosophy, where you get to certain points after death, where you get to recollect and reassess everything that has been done and decide between the soul, you, and the biological being, all three eternal creatures, whether you would like to join in again and go and try and do something else. So yeah, it's a fascinating conversation because it doesn't mean that I'm against the law of attraction. It means that I'm against the watered down version of it. I think that it should be deeply investigated. I think there is a lot to it, positivity, all of that. But let's have some space for the old ancestral wounds, especially considering things, intertribal stuff, racial stuff, regarding, like, just look at masculinity and femininity. That stuff is not going to balance out with a few positive thoughts. The pendulum, as the great law says, is swinging, and it's going to swing the other way now. And we've just got to hold space for it. But there has to be space in your life to use the law of attraction, which to me makes perfect sense, but to use it in the question of what is of true value, and should I or could I possibly be creating unnecessary karmic debt, which to me is an interference pattern, by thinking that I want one thing when actually the whole of me wants something so much more. And very often they're in contrary to each other. And to just be willing to be in that conversation. Yeah, what a beautiful thing to me. So yeah, it was just to stimulate your thoughts. I'm hoping if I've done my job of what I set out to do, that not one of you are even sure exactly what I said, Not one of you exactly sure what my stance is, but that you find yourself in an expanded state, realizing that there's just so much more to the divine than we realize, that there's plenty space for all this pain and all this breakdown. But at the same time, it does not mean you are not part of the most perfect pattern of absolute divine purpose that is holding you tight, even when you scream into the night, and that will be there upon your death and beyond, but it has no prerogative to explain itself to you. Not this little part of you, anyway.